They say a house never forgets the hands that built it, but sometimes the people who live inside do. My name is Evelyn Redbird, and this is the story of the day my daughter-in-law erased me from my own home. She called it redecorating. I call it disappearing. Before I tell you what happened, let me ask you this. If someone threw away the last photograph of the person you loved most in this world, would you forgive them? Or would that silence between you become a grave you could never fill again? The morning it all began was soft and pale, the kind of morning that hums with quiet promises. The curtains still carried the faint smell of cedar from the day my husband built those rods himself. Every corner of that house whispered his name, the way the floor creaked near the stove, the notch in the banister where he'd measured our son's height, the clock he'd fixed so many times that it ticked like his own heartbeat. I woke early, as I always did, wrapped in the comfort of memory. My knees ached when I stood, but pain had become a kind of old friend, a reminder that I was still here, still standing in the home we built from nothing but love and borrowed dreams. Then came the sound of tires crunching gravel, my son's car and hers. I smiled before I even saw them. It had been weeks since their last visit. I'd baked cornbread the way my son liked it and left a pot of stew simmering on the stove. My husband used to say, "Evelyn, food tastes better when it waits for someone." I suppose I never stopped waiting. The front door opened before I could reach it. My son, Matthew, walked in with a tired smile and arms full of grocery bags. "Hi, Mom," he said softly, kissing my cheek. We brought some things to help around the house. Behind him came Lydia, my daughter-in-law. She was beautiful, the kind of woman who never had a strand of hair out of place. Her perfume filled the hallway before she even spoke. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said, her voice sweet but distant, like a radio station just out of range. I handed her a towel to dry her hands after she set down a box. "You shouldn't have brought anything," I said, smiling. "You're the guest here." She laughed, a sound too crisp, too polite. "Oh no, we're family, and this place could use a little updating." Something inside me tightened. Updating. The word brushed past me like a cold wind. By noon, the house no longer sounded like itself. The hum of the vacuum drowned the old creaks of the floor. Lydia's voice rose above the noise, directing, deciding, discarding. She moved through the rooms like she owned them, opening drawers, moving chairs, stacking boxes. At first I tried to help. "Be careful with that," I said as she lifted a framed photograph from the mantel. Our wedding day, 52 years ago. My husband's hand rested on my shoulder in that photo, the same way he used to when he wanted me to know everything was okay. Lydia smiled faintly, examining the frame. "This one's a bit old, isn't it? Maybe we can replace it with something more modern, like a family portrait from this year." She didn't wait for an answer. The frame was already in the box marked donations. I felt my breath hitch, but I said nothing. My son was in the other room fixing a cabinet hinge, humming softly. He trusted her. He thought she was helping. And I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. I'd heard enough jokes about women like that to know silence was easier. But silence can be dangerous. It lets the world rearrange itself without your permission. By evening, the mantel was bare. The lace curtains my husband loved were folded into a trash bag. My rocking chair, the one where I'd cradled Matthew as a baby, sat outside on the porch waiting for the donation truck. I stood by the doorway, clutching the edge of my apron. "Lydia," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe we should keep some of these things. They're part of this home." She turned, brushing dust from her hands. "Evelyn, we're just making space. Clutter makes it hard to breathe. Clutter, that's what she called it. 40 years of love. 40 years of living." When Matthew came into the room, I thought maybe he'd see what I couldn't say. But he only smiled and kissed Lydia's temple. "It's looking great in here," he said. "Mom, you'll love it once it's all done." His words felt like stones in my chest. "You'll love it once it's all done." I nodded because I didn't know how to tell him that what they were doing wasn't fixing, it was erasing. Piece by piece, they were removing the map of my life, and I was too afraid to stop them. That night, when they went to bed in the guest room, I stayed awake in the dark living room. The walls looked naked without the photographs. The air felt wrong, cleaner, emptier, crueler. I sat on the cold floor where my husband's armchair used to be and whispered his name, hoping the walls might still remember it. The next morning, Lydia wore her hair tied up, ready for another day of refreshing. She pointed to a small wooden box on the shelf, my keepsake chest. Inside were letters, pressed flowers, and a folded handkerchief embroidered with my husband's initials. "What's this?" she asked lightly, lifting the lid. "Those are personal," I said quickly, stepping closer. "Please don't—" But she had already picked up one of the letters. My husband's handwriting, faded and trembling from the years, stared back at me. I reached out to take it, but she turned slightly, scanning it before setting it aside. "You really should let go of these old things," she murmured. "Holding on to the past only keeps you sad." Her words sliced deeper than she knew, because what she called sadness was all I had left of him. When she turned away, I gathered the letters back into the box, pressing them to my chest. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. I waited until they left for town that afternoon, said they'd be back with new curtains and photo frames. The moment the car disappeared down the road, I sat in the middle of the empty living room. The air smelled of lemon polish and loss. The sun hit the bare walls like an accusation. And for the first time in all my 76 years, I whispered to the house, "I think they're trying to forget me." The walls didn't answer, but the silence that followed told me I was right. Would you have stopped her? Would you have shouted, begged, pleaded, or would you have done what I did? Stood still, afraid that saying no would make you lose even more. Because that's how it begins. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with quiet, the kind that steals you piece by piece until there's nothing left to take. When they came back that afternoon, the house smelled of paint and plastic. Lydia stepped in first, humming some tune from her car radio, her arms full of shopping bags. Behind her came Matthew, carrying 2 big cardboard boxes. "We found the perfect curtains," Lydia announced brightly, as if we were planning a celebration. "Something lighter. It'll open up the space." The way she said "open up" made me shiver. I didn't want the space open. I wanted it full of memory, of the scent of cedar and old books, of the quiet weight of belonging. She started pulling out things from her bags. Curtains the color of bone, new silver picture frames, shiny table runners. Everything looked expensive, hollow, foreign. I tried to smile. "They're lovely," I said softly. "But these old ones, they were Thomas's favorite." "Oh, Evelyn," she laughed. "They're yellowed and torn. It's time to let the past breathe." She said it kindly, but that's the cruelty of kindness when it comes from someone who doesn't understand what they're taking. I stood by the window while she climbed the small ladder, pulling the curtain rod from its hinges. The sound of metal scraping wood made me flinch. It sounded like something breaking. I remembered Thomas standing on that same chair 40 years ago, hanging the first pair of curtains we could afford. They were cheap then, too, but he made me believe they looked like silk. We'd laughed when the rod slipped and he almost fell, his arms flailing like a boy's. I remember how he'd caught my waist and said, "If I fall, you're coming with me." Now, watching Lydia tear down what his hands had built, it felt like I'd fallen anyway, only this time he wasn't there to catch me. By evening, every room looked wrong. The walls had new pictures, all of them Lydia's choosing, glossy photographs of family vacations, smiling faces, perfectly lit and perfectly empty. My wedding photo was gone. The painting of the river Thomas loved to fish in was missing. Even the clock, the one that never kept time but always kept his, was replaced by a digital one that blinked without rhythm. When I asked where the old things were, Lydia said they were in the garage for now. The garage. That was the graveyard of the forgotten. After dinner, Matthew went outside to fix the gutter. Lydia stayed behind, folding tablecloths that weren't hers. I watched her from the doorway, my fingers gripping the counter so tight I could feel the blood pulsing in them. "Lydia," I said quietly, "please leave the photo of Thomas and me on the mantel, just that one." She turned, her eyes soft but unreadable. "Evelyn, I think it's better to keep things fresh. It's not healthy to live surrounded by reminders of loss." "Reminders?" I whispered. "That's not a reminder. That's my life." Her smile faltered for a moment, but she didn't stop folding. "You still have the memories. You don't need the clutter." That word again, clutter. How easily she said it. How easily she erased 40 years with a single breath. Later that night, I went into the garage with a flashlight. The air smelled of dust and cold cement. I found the boxes labeled donations stacked against the wall. My wedding photo was there, face down, its glass cracked. The edges of the frame were chipped where it had hit something hard. I knelt down, brushing away the dirt with trembling fingers. For a moment, I saw his eyes again, the same gentle brown that had watched me through every storm. My tears fell onto the glass, smudging his face. That's when I heard her voice behind me. "Evelyn, what are you doing out here?" The flashlight beam caught Lydia's face, startled, then tight. She crossed her arms. "You shouldn't be out here. It's cold and you could slip." "I was just looking for something," I said. She sighed, stepping closer. "You don't need to hold on to these things. They only make it harder." "Harder to what?" I whispered. "To remember?" She stared at me for a long moment. "To move on." I looked around the garage, the boxes, the dust, the hollow sound of emptiness. "I already did," I said. 40 years ago, when we built this house, I moved on with him, with our life, with everything we made together. I don't need to move on from that." She shook her head, almost pitying. "You'll thank me someday." Then she turned off the garage light and left me standing there in the dark. The next morning I woke to the sound of laughter, Lydia's and Matthew's. They were moving furniture in the living room. I walked in quietly, the floor cold under my feet. My rocking chair, my place, was gone. "Where is it?" I asked. Lydia looked up from arranging cushions. "Oh, that old chair. The movers took it this morning. We're replacing it with a recliner, more comfortable for you." I felt my heart drop. "You gave it away?" "It was falling apart," she said lightly. "Besides, it didn't fit with the new look." The new look. That chair had been my only anchor. the place I sat every night with Thomas, where I'd rocked Matthew when he had fevers, where I'd prayed after the funeral. I stepped forward without realizing my hand was shaking. That chair was mine, Lydia. It was part of this home. She looked at me, not cruelly, but with that firm, patronizing calm that young people use when they think they're saving you from yourself. It's just a chair, Evelyn. Something broke in me then. Not loud, not visible, just a small, tearing sound deep inside, like a stitch coming undone. I didn't speak again that day. I moved through the house like a ghost, touching walls that no longer knew me. When night came, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty corner where the rocking chair had always been. My hands trembled as I clutched the locket Thomas had given me. I whispered his name into the stillness and waited for something, anything, to answer. Only the new clock ticked, cold, mechanical, unfeeling. And in that ticking, I realized what Lydia had really done. She hadn't just redecorated my house. She had rewritten it, erased every trace of who I was, until even I began to wonder if I still belonged there. That's when I decided if I didn't fight for my memories, I'd lose them. But I didn't yet know how high the cost of remembering would be. Because before the week ended, she'd do something even worse. Something that would make me question the very meaning of love and family. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of day Thomas and I once called rest days. Back then, the smell of his coffee would drift from the kitchen before sunrise, and we'd sit on the porch, counting robins on the fence, talking about nothing at all. But that morning, the air in my house felt different, tight, crowded, like even the walls were holding their breath. Lydia had invited her friends from the neighborhood, young women in pastel blouses and soft laughter, their hair perfect, their voices bright with plans and gossip. I tried to stay in my room, but I could hear everything. Their words floated down the hallway, sugar-coated and sharp. "She's still living here," one of them whispered. "Yes," Lydia said with a little sigh. "We're working on transitioning her. It's hard when people her age get attached to things." They laughed quietly. I closed my eyes, pressing my palms together until my knuckles ached. People her age. That was what I had become. An age, not a person. After a while, I decided to make tea. Maybe a small act of grace could remind them I was still there, still human. I walked into the kitchen slowly, my slippers brushing against the floor, my heart thudding like a small drum. "Oh, Evelyn," Lydia said, startled, her cheeks flushing. "You didn't have to get up. We're fine." "I thought I'd make some tea," I said gently. "It's what we used to do when guests came by." Her friends smiled politely, the way you do for someone you pity. I poured the hot water, the steam rising like ghosts between us. One of the women, I think her name was Carly, glanced at the chipped teapot in my hands. "That's so vintage," she said. "My grandmother had one just like it before we upgraded her kitchen. Before we upgraded her." I smiled thinly, even as my fingers trembled. "This was a wedding gift," I said softly. "From my husband. It still works just fine." "Oh, that's sweet," Lydia said quickly, setting down her phone. "But Evelyn, we really need to get you something new. That pot leaks, remember?" She reached for it. "Here, let me—" The pot slipped. The boiling water splashed against my wrist. I gasped, dropping it. The teapot shattered on the tile, scattering porcelain like tiny bones. For a moment the room froze. Steam rose between us, and my heartbeat sounded too loud in my ears. "Oh, my God!" Lydia exclaimed, grabbing a towel. "Why didn't you tell me it was so hot?" "It's supposed to be hot," I whispered. Her friends were standing now, their voices overlapping, concern, pity, discomfort. Lydia dabbed my wrist, shaking her head like I was a child who'd made a mess. "This is exactly what I mean," she said under her breath. "You can't handle these things anymore. You need proper supervision." Something inside me cracked then, not like a scream, but like a whisper finally too heavy to hold. I straightened slowly. "Supervision?" She blinked, realizing her mistake too late. "I just mean—" "No," I said, my voice trembling but clear. "I've been boiling tea since before you were born, Lydia." The room fell silent. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Her friends looked away, pretending to check their phones. Lydia forced a smile. "We're just trying to help." But that's the thing about help. It doesn't heal when it humiliates. I turned and walked back to my room. My wrist stung where the water had kissed it, but that pain was nothing compared to what sat in my chest. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the box on my nightstand, the one that held Thomas's letters. Every line he wrote was full of gentleness, of small acts of care. He never once made me feel like a burden. Now, in my own home, I felt like one. That evening, when the guests were gone, I heard them arguing in the kitchen. "She could have really hurt herself, Matt. She needs to be somewhere safe." "And she needs her dignity," my son said quietly. "You can't just take that from her." "I'm not taking anything. I'm trying to help. You think I like being the bad guy?" "You threw away her chair, her photos, because she wouldn't. She's clinging to ghosts." I pressed my pillow over my ears, but their voices slipped through the fabric. Every word was a knife. Finally, I heard the back door slam. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. A few minutes later, Matthew knocked on my door. "Mom," he said softly, "you okay?" I couldn't answer. If I opened my mouth, I would cry, and I didn't want him to carry my tears like another guilt. He sat beside me, the bed dipping slightly under his weight. "She means well," he murmured. "She just doesn't understand." I turned to him then, my eyes wet. "Then maybe she should try." He looked down, and that silence said everything he couldn't. The next morning, I came into the living room and found Lydia already there, cleaning the last of the tea stains from the floor. She didn't look at me. I didn't speak either. But then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Matthew and I found a place for you, Evelyn," she said lightly, as though she were announcing a dinner reservation. "It's beautiful, near the lake with nurses and gardens and other people your age." My breath caught. "You... what?" "It's already arranged," she continued, "just for a few months, until the renovation's done." "Renovation?" I whispered. "Yes," she said, smiling faintly. "We're converting your room into a nursery." The word nursery hit me like a stone. In that instant, I understood I was being replaced. Not out of cruelty, perhaps, but out of convenience. I stood there, every bone in my body trembling. "Lydia," I said, barely breathing, "this is my home." She looked at me, her eyes strangely kind, as if she were talking to someone already halfway gone. "You'll always be welcome here, Evelyn," she said. "But sometimes love means letting go." And that was the moment, the exact second, something inside me changed forever. Because love never meant letting go. It meant holding on, even when the world told you not to. It meant remembering the promises made under roofs you built together. It meant staying. But Lydia didn't understand that. And I realized, with a hollow ache, that maybe she never would. The morning light came through the curtains like pale confession, soft but unforgiving. I had packed a small suitcase, though I didn't remember deciding to. Maybe I did it in my sleep, some part of me surrendering before the rest of me could protest. My son hadn't spoken since the night before. Lydia was moving around the house with a kind of rehearsed calm, humming under her breath while folding baby clothes that didn't yet belong to anyone. Everything about that morning felt wrong, like the air itself had changed ownership. She knocked softly before stepping in. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said, smiling too wide. "I made you some oatmeal." "I'm not hungry," I replied, folding one of Thomas's old sweaters. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed gently, watching me. "You're really not making this easy, you know." I looked up at her. "Easy?" She sighed, walking in, lowering her voice. "We've been trying to do what's best for everyone. I can't take care of you the way you need. You stumble. You forget things. You nearly burned yourself yesterday. It's not fair to Matthew or to the baby we're—" "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't talk about fairness in a house I built with my hands." Her lips tightened. "You didn't build this house, Evelyn. Matthew did. We did." "No," I said, setting the sweater down. "You just redecorated it." Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or irritation dressed as concern. "You're twisting things. I'm just trying to help." "You're trying to erase me." Her jaw clenched. "That's not true." I turned then, my voice shaking, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. "Yesterday I found my wedding photo in the trash. The one with Thomas by the porch steps. You didn't even ask." Her expression shifted, a flicker of annoyance. "It was damaged. The frame was broken." "It wasn't broken until you broke it," I whispered. Silence. I reached for the photo. I had pulled it from the bin and wiped it clean, though the glass was cracked like a spider's web. I held it up between us. "Do you see this man?" She crossed her arms. "Evelyn." "This man built this home," I said, my voice rising. "He planted the trees outside. He carved our initials on the porch. Every corner of this house is a prayer we built together. You can repaint it, redecorate it, fill it with your laughter, but it will always remember us." "Enough," she snapped. "You can't guilt me with your memories forever. Times change. People move on. And you think I should just disappear quietly?" Her tone softened, condescending. "You don't have to make this ugly. We'll visit you every week. You'll make friends there. It'll be peaceful." "Peaceful?" I interrupted, trembling. "You call taking away everything I love peaceful? You're sending me away from the only place that knows my name." "Evelyn," she said, her voice sharp now, "you are not the only one who matters here." I stepped closer. "Then why does it feel like I'm the only one being erased?" She flinched, her eyes flashing. "You're being impossible." And then it happened. I don't know if her hand moved before her heart did, or if her heart even moved at all. But her palm struck my cheek with a sound that didn't belong in this house. Sharp, foreign, final. The world went quiet. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. For a long second she froze, her own hand hovering midair, as if she didn't believe what she'd done. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just looked at her, my cheeks stinging, my heart gone strangely still. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" But I stepped back. "You did." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Evelyn." "No," I said, my voice breaking. "You don't get to say my name anymore." I turned and walked out. The hallway seemed longer than ever, lined with photographs she hadn't yet taken down, memories she hadn't yet painted over. I paused by the porch, where the light hit Thomas's carved initials on the wood. T+E, faded but still there, still ours. I touched the carving with my trembling hand. "I'm sorry, Thomas," I whispered. I tried to keep it whole. Then I picked up my small suitcase, stepped outside, and closed the door, gently, almost reverently, as if to not wake the ghosts still sleeping inside. When I reached the gate, Matthew came running after me. "Mom, wait!" He grabbed my arm, his eyes frantic. "What happened? Where are you going?" I looked at him. My son, the boy who used to bring me wildflowers just because he'd seen me smile once. "Home," I said softly. He frowned. "But this is home." I shook my head slowly. "Not anymore." He stood there, torn between two loves, the one he came from and the one he built. "Mom," he said again, almost a plea, "please don't do this." I smiled through my tears. I already did. He tried to hug me, but I stepped back, not out of anger, but because I knew if I felt his arms around me, I would stay. And if I stayed, I would lose what little of myself was left. "Tell her," I whispered, "that forgiveness isn't something you buy with apologies. It's something you earn with change." Then I turned and walked down the road. Each step felt heavier than the last. Each breath felt like a goodbye. But somewhere behind me, a bird started to sing, a lonely, small sound against the vast morning. And for the first time in years, I realized that maybe leaving wasn't losing. Maybe it was remembering who I was before silence became my language. That was the day my daughter-in-law slapped me. But the truth is, it wasn't her hand that hurt the most. It was the moment I realized my love had turned invisible in the house it once built. The room they gave me was small, but it was clean. A single bed by the window, a wooden chair, a little table with a vase that always held fresh flowers, lilies, sometimes daisies, depending on the nurse's mood. They called it Mapleview Home. I called it the waiting place. Every morning I'd sit by the window and watch the world move, a world that no longer needed to make space for me. Children playing on the sidewalk, couples walking hand in hand, the gardener trimming hedges, humming to himself, not knowing I used to have a garden once too, roses, yellow ones, because Thomas said they looked like captured sunlight. Sometimes the wind carried scents of the earth that reminded me of my porch. For a second I'd forget where I was. I'd look at the door and half expect Thomas to walk in, wiping his hands on his work apron, grinning that boyish grin of his. Then I'd remember. He was gone. And so was the home we built. The nurses were kind. Too kind, maybe. They spoke in soft voices like I might break if they used my name too loudly. But what they didn't understand was I was already broken, just neatly so. The kind of brokenness that doesn't bleed anymore, just quietly aches. I kept my photo of Thomas on the nightstand, the same one Lydia had thrown away. I'd glued the frame back together, even though the glass still bore that spiderweb crack through his smile. It felt symbolic somehow. Love that lasts but doesn't stay whole. Weeks passed. Matthew called twice. The first time he apologized, his voice trembling. The second time he cried. He said Lydia was sorry too, that she'd been under stress, that she never meant to hurt me. I told him I forgave them both. And maybe, in that moment, I truly did. But forgiveness doesn't rebuild what's been taken. It just lets you breathe without choking on the ashes. One afternoon, I went down to the garden behind the facility. It wasn't big, but it had benches and sunlight, two things I've always needed to survive. I brought Thomas's photo with me and sat there, letting the wind turn the pages of a small journal I'd started keeping. It wasn't much, just fragments, little thoughts I didn't want to vanish when I did. If love could echo, Maybe it would sound like a door closing softly, not out of anger, but of acceptance. Sometimes the cruelest silence is not when someone stops talking, but when they stop remembering. I used to belong to a house. Now I belong to time. I wrote until the sun began to fall. That's when I heard footsteps. Grandma? My heart stumbled. Tessa. She was standing there, older, calmer, guilt written across her face like it had finally found its place to rest. She knelt beside me and placed her head in my lap. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," she whispered. "I should have stopped her that day." I didn't answer at first. I just stroked her hair, remembering the smell of her childhood, soap, grass, and innocence. "You didn't make her hand move, sweetheart," I said softly. "Life did." She cried then, the kind of crying that shakes, not because of what happened, but because of what can never be undone. "I kept your ring," she said suddenly, reaching into her bag. "I found it in one of Mom's drawers. I think she couldn't bring herself to throw it away." She placed it in my palm, my old wedding ring. The gold dulled with time, but when the sunlight hit it just right, it still shone. I turned it over in my hand. "Thomas once said this ring wasn't made of gold. He said it was made of promises. Funny thing about promises. They fade slower than people." Tessa sniffled. "Do you hate her?" I looked at her. "No, child. Hate only keeps you living in the same moment forever. I've lived too long to stay trapped in a single pain." She nodded, though her tears didn't stop. "Will you ever come home?" Home. That word again, like a ghost that still thinks it's welcome. "I don't think that house remembers me anymore," I said. "But maybe that's all right. Houses forget. Hearts remember." We sat there quietly after that. The wind brushed against us, warm and forgiving. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint laughter of a young woman. It almost sounded like Lydia's, years younger, before the world hardened her. Maybe that was memory's last kindness. It let you hear people as they once were, not as they became. As the evening fell, Tessa helped me back to my room. She kissed my forehead and whispered, "I'll come back soon." After she left, I placed the ring on the nightstand beside Thomas's photo. Two small pieces of a life that once fit perfectly together. Then I sat by the window again, looking out at the fading sky, a canvas painted with endings that pretended to be sunsets, and I whispered, "Thomas, I finally learned what peace is. It isn't forgetting. It's remembering without begging the past to change." The clock ticked softly. The lilies in the vase leaned toward the light. And for the first time since I'd been brought there, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was home, not in walls or wood or stone, but in every heartbeat that still dared to remember love, even after being forgotten. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it. This is Beloved Grandma Channel, where every wrinkle hides a memory and every memory tells the truth.